Sometimes silence speaks louder than any words ever could. The moment you stop reaching out, the air changes. It's not anger. It's not revenge. It's the quiet recognition of your own worth. Silence becomes the loudest voice when words are no longer needed, when the absence itself carries a weight heavier than any sound could hold. There comes a time when the world grows still, and in that stillness lies a power so profound it makes people stop, wonder, and listen in ways they never did before. Silence is not empty. It is filled with meaning, with echoes of what was once said, once done, once felt. When you step back, when the calls and messages fade, when the presence they had come to expect vanishes like a candle snuffed out in the night, the quiet does not go unnoticed. It lingers in the room, in the mind, in the heart, weaving questions no one knows how to answer. It is in that quiet that realizations begin to bloom. Silence creates a mirror where words once created walls. It invites a person to face themselves without distraction, without excuses, without the comfort of constant reassurance. It strips away the noise of routine interactions and forces a confrontation with emotions long ignored. The human heart was never built to thrive in emptiness. It craves connection, attention, and warmth. And when those things are suddenly taken away, the silence that follows roars louder than any argument, any accusation, any goodbye ever could. The beauty of silence is that it cannot be faked. You can pretend to laugh, pretend to care, pretend to listen, but you cannot pretend to be absent. Absence is real. It leaves a mark that cannot be covered with hollow words. It demands attention without ever raising its voice. People often assume that presence is power, that constant communication is the glue that holds everything together. But it is often in the loss of presence that true power is revealed. When the calls stop coming, when the words stop flowing, when the attention stops arriving like clockwork, it creates a shift that nothing else can imitate. Suddenly, the value of what was once taken for granted begins to rise like smoke from a burning fire. The absence pulls at the edges of the mind, reminding it of the warmth that once filled the space, now left cold. Silence has a way of sharpening memories, making the small moments appear brighter. The laughter sound louder, the comfort feel deeper than it did when it was still here. People remember what they lost far more clearly than what they have. That is the gift and the curse of absence. It magnifies everything it touches. And yet silence is never just about loss. It is also about boundaries, about self-respect, about reclaiming energy that was once poured endlessly into someone else. There is a strength in choosing not to speak, not to chase, not to fill the space with explanations or demands. Silence says, I will not compete for what should be freely given. I will not beg for the attention that should arrive on its own. It holds dignity where words might hold desperation. It gives the other person the room to feel the consequences of their own choices, the space to see what life feels like without the presence they once expected to be there forever. This is why silence becomes the loudest voice. It needs no stage, no audience, no applause. It simply exists, heavy and undeniable, turning the absence of sound into the presence of meaning. The weight of emptiness settles in slowly, like dusk falling over a once bright landscape, painting everything in muted tones. At first, it feels like nothing has changed. The world moves on, days slip by, conversations happen, but beneath the surface there is a shift, a hollow space where something used to be. The absence carries its own kind of heaviness, one that is not loud or obvious, but quietly persistent, pressing down on the heart in ways words can't fully describe. It is the kind of weight that makes the air feel thicker, moments feel longer, and memories feel sharper than they did before. When presence is constant, people rarely stop to measure its value. The warmth, the attention, the energy flows so naturally that they become part of the background, like music playing softly in a room. You don't notice it until it stops. And when it stops, the silence feels deafening. That is when the weight of emptiness begins to grow. When the reality of what is gone starts to settle in like dust over abandoned furniture, there is no sound, yet there is a heaviness that fills every corner, a quiet ache that lingers even in laughter, even in moments meant to distract from it. It is in this emptiness that truth begins to surface. The realization that the presence once taken for granted was never promised, that the warmth could disappear, that the attention could fade, creates a restlessness hard to ignore. It feels like a missing piece, an unfinished sentence, a song cut off before the final note. The absence doesn't just remove what was there, it creates a vacuum that pulls at the edges of memory, making the moments once shared feel heavier with meaning than they ever did before. There is a certain irony in how emptiness works. When someone is there, day after day, with words, gestures, care, and consistency, it can feel almost ordinary. Familiarity makes it easy to overlook the extraordinary within the ordinary. But once the presence is gone, once the familiar stops arriving like the sunrise, the mind begins to replay every moment like scenes from a film, suddenly given more depth. The smile once dismissed as routine feels priceless. The comfort once treated as a given feels irreplaceable. Absence does this. It sharpens what was blurred, enlarges what was small, amplifies what was quiet until it echoes in the silence left behind. The weight of emptiness also brings an unspoken reckoning. It demands reflection without ever asking for it out loud. In the stillness, there is no one to fill the space with explanations, no one to soothe the edges of loneliness. There is only the self, facing the reality of what was once present and is now gone. And in that reality lies a lesson about value, about how easily humans grow accustomed to what they should have cherished, about how quickly they assume something lasting when it was always fragile. Emptiness is heavy because it carries not just the absence of the present, but also the weight of realization, regret, and longing all at once. It sits quietly but firmly, refusing to be ignored, forcing the heart and mind to feel the gap it leaves behind. It is the heaviness of what could have been, what once was, and what may never return. That is the power of emptiness. It doesn't shout, but it leaves a mark that cannot be erased. The restless search begins when the familiar presence disappears, leaving behind a space that cannot be ignored. At first there is confusion, a quiet wondering about what changed, a subtle realization that something once certain is no longer there. The mind begins to wander through memories, retracing steps, revisiting conversations, looking for clues in places where there might be none. It feels like standing in a room where a candle has just been blown out. The smoke still lingers, the warmth still clings to the air, but the light is gone, and with it goes the sense of comfort that once felt unshakable. The search does not always look like searching. Sometimes it hides beneath ordinary days, in the way thoughts drift without warning, in the way a name echoes silently in the back of the mind. The absence becomes a question demanding answers, even when no one is asking it out loud. It is human nature to want to understand, to find reasons, to seek out what slipped through the fingers before there was time to hold it tighter. And so the search begins, not always with actions, but with thoughts, with emotions, with that knowing curiosity about what changed, what shifted, what led to the silence that now fills the space where words used to live. This restlessness comes in waves. At first, it might be subtle, a fleeting thought here and there, a quiet wondering during moments of stillness. But as time passes, it grows heavier, stronger, pulling the mind deeper into questions it cannot easily escape. The search turns into late-night reflections, into scanning old messages, into remembering small details that once seemed unimportant, but now feel like puzzle pieces to a bigger picture. It becomes a journey through memories, through imagined scenarios, through everything that might offer an explanation for the sudden emptiness. Now pressing at the edges of everyday life, there is a kind of irony in this restless search, because it rarely begins when everything feels secure and constant. It begins only after the silence arrives, After the steady rhythm of connection disappears, people seldom stop to analyze what feels certain, but the moment that certainty fades, the mind can think of little else. It replays moments like a song stuck on repeat, looking for signs it might have missed, for words that might have carried deeper meaning, for choices that could have changed the outcome. The search is not just for answers, it is for reassurance, for the comfort that comes with knowing something important has not been lost forever. This restlessness carries its own kind of weight. It interrupts focus, sneaks into quiet moments, shows up in places where distractions fail to keep it away. It is the human heart's way of saying it cannot simply let go without first trying to understand, without first trying to fill the space left behind by what was once there. Even when the search leads nowhere, even when no answers appear, the act itself becomes unavoidable, as if seeking might somehow bring back what disappeared, as if looking hard enough might turn absence back into presence. The restless search is not always loud or visible. It lives in silent questions, in the pauses between conversations, in the way someone glances at their phone, even when they know there will be no message waiting. It is both a hope and a denial, a refusal to fully accept the silence, while also feeling its weight more deeply with each passing day. It turns the ordinary into reminders, the quiet into noise, the present into a map of memories leading back to what once was, but is no longer here. The mirror of reflection appears slowly, often without warning, as though silence itself reaches out and holds it up for the first time. In the absence of constant words, constant presence, constant energy flowing freely, the mind is left with nothing but its own thoughts staring back at it. At first, it feels uncomfortable, this stillness, this sudden pause in the rhythm that once filled the days without question. But then, like water settling after a storm, the surface clears, and what lies beneath begins to emerge. Every choice, every moment taken for granted, every careless word or overlooked gesture comes back, not as a whisper, but as a weight pressing down, demanding to be seen clearly. Reflection has a way of stripping away excuses. It does not soften the truth or blur the edges of reality. It holds everything exactly as it happened and forces the mind to look, really look, at the patterns it once ignored. In the silence left behind, there is no one to point fingers at, no noise to drown out the thoughts that rise one after another like waves crashing against the shore. The mirror does not lie. It shows the version of oneself shaped not by intentions, but by actions, by what was done, what was said, what was neglected, what was allowed to fade without a fight. In the beginning, it feels like discomfort, the kind of unease that makes a person restless, wanting to move, to distract themselves, to run from the images playing over and over in the mind. But reflection is patient. It waits. It follows into quiet moments, into nights when sleep will not come easily, into days when even laughter feels like it carries an undertone of something unresolved. Slowly, it becomes impossible to avoid. The mind begins to replay conversations, small moments once dismissed, now appearing sharper, heavier, as though they carried clues that went unnoticed before. There is a reason why silence and reflection walk hand in hand. Noise fills space, it leaves no room for introspection. But when the noise stops, when the familiar voice or presence disappears, there is finally enough quiet to hear the thoughts long pushed aside. Reflection grows in that quiet, showing where things went wrong, where appreciation fell short, where assumptions replaced gratitude. It shows the moments when love or care or connection was received like it would always be there, like it could never end, until one day it simply wasn't there anymore. The mirror of reflection does not just show loss, it shows responsibility. It reveals the difference between what someone intended to give and what they actually gave. It forces the recognition that effort was not equal, that presence was not valued as it should have been, that words of appreciation came far too rarely. It uncovers the truth that sometimes people assume loyalty, attention, and care will remain even when they stop earning it, even when they stop nurturing what was once freely given. And so the reflection deepens. It becomes not just about the absence itself, but about the self who now stands in front of the mirror with nowhere else to look. The weight of regret creeps in, heavy and undeniable, mixing with the understanding that time cannot be rewound, that words unsaid cannot always be spoken later, that silence itself was invited by the choices made along the way. It leaves a person with questions about what could have been different, what should have been seen sooner, what might never be fixed now that the moment has passed. The stirring of change begins quietly, almost invisibly, like the first winds before a coming storm. At first, there is only a subtle shift, a restlessness that sits beneath the surface, a feeling that something can no longer stay the same. The silence, the absence, the weight of what has happened begins to push against the walls built by habit and comfort. What once felt certain now feels fragile, and with that realization comes a choice. Whether to stay unmoved, clinging to old ways of thinking, or to let the silence shape something new within. Change rarely announces itself with clarity. It comes in fragments, in late night thoughts that refuse to quiet down, in realizations that appear while doing ordinary things. It comes when memories begin to feel heavier than they should, when words once spoken echo differently than they did before, when patterns that were once invisible suddenly stand out in sharp detail. The stirring begins slowly, but it grows with each moment of reflection, each memory replayed, each consequence felt more deeply than before. Some resist it at first. Change asks for honesty, and honesty can be uncomfortable. It requires looking at the truth without filters, admitting the role played in how things unfolded, seeing clearly what could no longer be denied. That is why the stirring often begins as unease, as discomfort, as the sense that something inside needs to shift, even before there are words to describe it. It is the heart and mind quietly agreeing that the old way of being will no longer work, even if the next steps are not yet clear. The silence makes room for this transformation in ways constant noise never could. When everything is loud and busy, when words and actions keep filling every space, there is little time to stop and see what needs to change. But when the familiar voices go quiet, when the routines break, when the things once taken for granted disappear, there is finally space to hear the truth underneath it all. And in that space, change begins to breathe. It does not always look dramatic at first. It might be a thought repeated over and over until it becomes impossible to ignore. It might be the growing awareness that something precious was handled carelessly. It might be the realization that taking things for granted always comes with a cost. Change begins as a whisper long before it becomes a decision. But once it starts, it rarely stops. The stirring of change carries both hope and discomfort. Hope because it offers the chance to become better, to do differently, to see more clearly than before. Discomfort because it demands letting go of pride, facing regret, admitting mistakes that were easier to deny when everything felt certain and unshaken. Change asks for courage, not in loud or public ways, but in the quiet decision to no longer be the same person who created the silence in the first place. And so the stirring grows stronger with time. It waits for the moment when denial softens into honesty, when regret turns into understanding, when the desire to hold on to the past gives way to the need to become someone who would never repeat it. It asks for a shift in perspective, for a new way of moving through the world, for the humility to see what was invisible before everything fell quiet. The power of moving on begins softly, like the first light of morning, slowly breaking through the darkness after a long night. It doesn't rush, it doesn't demand, it simply arrives when the weight of holding on has grown too heavy to carry any longer. At first, there is resistance because letting go feels like losing something, even when there is nothing left to hold. The heart clings to memories, to moments, to what could have been, hoping somehow the past would change, if it is held tightly enough. But time moves forward with, or without permission. And eventually the truth settles in. Moving on is not about forgetting, it is about choosing to live again, despite what was lost. There is strength in this decision, though it rarely feels like strength in the beginning. It feels like surrender, like standing at the edge of everything familiar and stepping into the unknown. The mind keeps replaying what happened, trying to rewrite it, trying to understand it, trying to cling to the last threads of what once was. But slowly, with each passing day, the grip begins to loosen. The silence that once felt heavy starts to feel lighter, no longer a chain but a space where healing can begin. Moving on does not come all at once. It begins in small ways, almost unnoticed. It comes in the moment when a memory surfaces and doesn't hurt as sharply as before. It comes when laughter returns unexpectedly, when peace slips in quietly during moments that used to feel unbearable. It comes when the need for answers fades, and the questions no longer control every thought. Like seasons changing, it happens gradually, until one day it becomes clear that life has shifted, that the heart is no longer living entirely in the past. The power of moving on is found in the freedom it creates. Freedom from the weight of what can't be changed. Freedom from waiting for someone to return. From hoping things will go back to the way they were. From holding on to words that will never be spoken. It is the choice to stop standing in the same place, to stop living in the echoes of something that ended, to step into a life no longer defined by what is missing. For some, this power feels like forgiveness, not always for the other person, but for themselves. For the time spent holding on, for the nights spent questioning, for the energy given to what could not be saved. For others, it feels like acceptance, the deep understanding that not everything is meant to stay, that some chapters end, no matter how much we wish they wouldn't. Either way, moving on becomes a turning point, a quiet reclaiming of the heart's strength after it has been scattered by loss. And through it all, there is growth, the kind of growth that only comes from walking through endings and learning how to begin again. Moving on teaches the value of presence, the fragility of connection, the importance of choosing people who choose you in return. It shapes the heart in ways staying still never could, stretching it, strengthening it, teaching it to love again without losing itself in the process. With each step forward, the past grows softer. The memories remain, but they no longer hold the same power. The silence that once felt like an ending becomes a space for new beginnings. And the person who once felt broken learns they can carry the lessons without carrying the pain. And so, the silence becomes the teacher. It begins with the absence, the weight of emptiness, the restless search for what was lost. It brings the mirror of reflection, the stirring of change, and finally, the quiet strength to move on. Each moment shapes the heart in ways words cannot explain, carving lessons into the soul with a steady hand. What begins as loss transforms into wisdom, and what once felt like an ending opens the door to a new beginning. The silence does not break you. It remakes you.